Let me try to break down some of the divide that I began to build up at the beginning. I think the common purpose of everybody here is the idea that science and technology allows us to live better, fuller lives, and if that there's an element of that is the intellectual fulfillment of what it means to understand the world. Some of that is the hands-on fulfillment of having a faster computer, or having a cell phone that lets you connect to anybody in the world from anywhere in the world. Those things they don't have to be at war with each other, and they're mutually exclusive. They're really all, the Crazy or Brilliant theme, I think, really, very specifically covers both of those. And I think, the question across the spectrum is, then how do you encourage that? How do you encourage that stroke of brilliance that allowed one person to see a theoretical breakthrough, or that moment that lets someone see, this laser or this photonic physics is actually good for something very practical. Anybody wanted to jump in on that? John, maybe, because you have the advantage of something of an outsider's perspective on the research process, and you've looked at a lot of different case studies.
Sure. I think the word ecosystem comes to mind, but I'm a great believer that the innovators, that curiosity, that we're not at a moment where that's being suppressed, but once people like Mikhail come forward with something they want to do, can they be funded? Can they be encouraged? Can they be gone along? I think, in writing about Bell Labs, and one thing that came up repeatedly to me is that there's this incredible focus on the moment of breakthrough, the sort of research, aha moment. And in some ways, as I spent years and years digging through this stuff and reading through, I came more and more to appreciate the development process and how rare it was, and how difficult it was, and how arduous it was for people who kept failing to actually make reliable, manufacturable, economical products that would actually kind of infiltrate the economy, that would make an impact on people's lives, on the phone system, really, which was the sort of grand idea here. And so in some ways, somebody here, I think you had mentioned earlier, we were talking about the American, the Recovery and Reinvestment Act, this sort of big, binge of funding, for instance, with energy projects. And I do worry about things like that there's just a flood of money, and then it somehow disappears. Mm-hmm. And I think that's incredibly problematic. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's maybe where I'd start from.
Well, it does, and it also, it touches on something that came up in my earlier conversations, both with Shelley and Michal, the problem of in a sense, money is this great cleansing agent, because if you can convince people to put money into what you're doing, you have to make a case, and then you have to demonstrate a payoff. On the other hand, if the money is inconsistent, if it comes in fits and starts, it can really disrupt the creative process. And actually, both of you have had key moments in which defense spending actually turned out to be kind of important for your research. Maybe the two of you can talk quickly about that. About sort of was that important to the work that you did?
So I can say a little bit about my own case. Because I do experimental work, you do need a lot of funding, and actually I got a lot of funding from several different sources, but one key was from the DoD and DARPA. And DARPA has two sites.
So let me just jump in. DARPA is the Defense Advanced
Research Agency. And it has two sides of it. The good side is that a lot of the projects are very, very visionary. We have an internal joke that we say the program managers, the actual ones who distribute the money, they probably get their ideas from science fiction movies.
Yeah, they actually are the people who invented the internet.
Yes, yeah. The more difficult one, especially for people that starting out in new research areas, is the fact that they rely on, it's a very short leash, meaning they give the funding for a year and a half, 3 years maybe, and you have to really produce your results. These are experimental black and white results every 6 months. So that makes it difficult to completely be creative with no strings attached. So there are very few funding sources with no strings attached. Take the money, go think.
Now, Shelley, you've had interactions with both the Department of Defense and with NASA, and I think those are both sort of instructive examples. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
So we'll leave DARPA alone for the moment because that's secret projects. So we'll talk about NASA. I was approached. It turned out that my first partner in Symbol Technologies and Barcodes, he always told me of how he wanted to be an astronaut. And I said, aren't we enjoying ourselves now? But Jerry used to say, that was really what I wanted to do, and they turned me down. So I don't know, maybe that stuck in my mind or something. But later on in life, after Symbol and after setting up a venture fund and doing some of that, someone came to me from the Smithsonian and said, Bob Citron, and said, you know those space shuttles out there, and now we should all, it's on our minds because they're putting it on the ship here, it's on the museum, the Intrepid. That's an Endeavour, which actually was not put into use, but it was a prototype. So everybody knows about space shuttles. We also know that we've stopped. You know, our manned space effort started in the Mercury, the capsules, and then it went on to the shuttles. And there's an international station, and we're basically out of the game in the sense that we have no means to go there at all. We have to sort of get a ride from the Russians. Anyway, this gentleman came to me and said, you know, there's a big empty cargo bay. Sure, the Hubble went up there, and that was fabulous for the science community. But otherwise, there's no place for the humans. And isn't the shuttle is supposed to be for humans? And they have a very small cabin. I said, yeah, it's regrettable. Why are you coming to see me? Well, I have a plan. My plan is to build pressurized modules, single, double, triples, put them in the cargo bay, and have a little tunnel going into the front end, the cabin where all the astronauts are. So once they're in orbit, we quadruple the volume that they can actually do experiments in microgravity. Basically looking at the science, when you take the G out of it, basically, out of the equation, how do things act? Whether it's protein crystal growth, or whether it's electronic materials, whether it's looking at fire research, whether it's looking at how the bodies interact, etc. Wow, I said, that was fantastic. Very interesting to know. Why did you come to me? Well, we thought maybe as an entrepreneur, investor, scientist, you'd like to fund this. So I said, well, I don't know much about it, but I'll check it out. And it turns out that one of my friends, and it keeps going back to Bell Labs, was a fellow named Ed David, who had run parts of Bell Labs for a period of time. And when I was there, fortunately, I met him, and then he went on to the White House to be science advisor. And it turned out that during his tenure as science advisor to the president, he actually had to recommend or not recommend this plan to build these shuttles. He said, everything you've just heard is true, and the reason having to do with some military effort that they needed that empty cargo bay, which never happened, so they ended up with an empty cargo bay. No destination other than orbit. So he said, okay, well, help us do this. It's great, it'll be important to our nation and to blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I grabbed on that problem in parallel with doing more down-to-earth things for my venture firm. And the company is called SpaceHab. You probably haven't heard much about it, because part of the bargain was I wouldn't say much about it. NASA, in its glory, couldn't have a little company startup solve the problem of research in space and making the shuttles useful. Now I guess I can say it, but I guess I can't go back and work with NASA again. At any rate, out of all this effort, and part of it had to do very dedicated people, coming out of even NASA, secure jobs, to do it the right way. People who did it the first time around and got men into space in the Mercury, which, remember with John Glenn? Even John Glenn himself, who was told you cannot fly again after he got the ticket parade, coming back, because if you die in the process, you'll ruin the public relations for the program. So he became a senator. And of course, he kept going back and trying to find a reason to fly. Well, the short of this is that we did build the modules. It was an international effort because everybody was interested in space. Space belonged to everybody. It's viewing the Earth from out there. And so in raising this capital, which amounted to about $150 million, with nothing more than a cartoon about what it looked like, it happened. So SpaceHab ran 18 missions, which all the microgravity research done on the space shuttles was done in the SpaceHab modules and with modern laboratories. And we also helped save the Mir space station when the oxygen generator went out, when the computer went out. We were actually in vertical on the launch pad. We had 27 hours to get our crew together aboard. Never been done before, but we were such a gung-ho, can-do attitude. We got it done. And we also participated in the resupply to the International Station, to the Mir, and unfortunately, on the 18th mission, which was dedicated not just to science, but also to kids. We had a few million kids around the world who had hypothesized what would it be like in space. And there was an Israeli group who was aboard, of course an astronaut from Israel and from a number of other countries. And they were interneting back and forth, oh, what's your experiment? You're going to have a butterfly come out, metamorphosis from a caterpillar. We think it'll work, etc. Unfortunately, that mission, the Columbia, you all know, in 2003 disintegrated on re-entry.
Right. That is, of course, one of the things that comes with doing high risk
So it was high risk
adventure.
And that was what happened. But that was sort of the energy went out of it, at least for me, because I had been involved with all the people involved who were on that flight. As far as the company itself, and NASA already was getting to the point where they didn't have the kind of funding they had before. What drove the funding, and this is just a fact of life, was really a Cold War. It was a way to demonstrate prowess in space and look what I could do if I wanted to without actually shooting at each other. Unfortunately, it's never been revitalized, and the United States is no longer at the top of this. And basically, the next time out there will be China. And they've already bought most of the technology they need from Russia. On the other hand, as communities get to work together and are integrated in terms of better purposes, hopefully it will not be military, and we'll participate as well, but it will end up being an international effort. And maybe that's better. Maybe that's what should happen.
Well, I think that's a good question, because certainly, that's a theme that I've heard many times in recent years, is that with the loss of the Cold War certainty, with the loss of defense funding, with a loss of kind of the primacy of the hard sciences and of basic research, that American science has lost something very powerful. And I think we're right in the middle of a very sort of a big question mark era of is there a new model? Is there a more collaborative, interdisciplinary model that takes its place, or have we lost something really fundamental that allowed these far out ideas to mature and produce? I mean, look, radar, lasers, rocket technology, a lot of modern computer technology. An awful lot of this stuff grew out of World War II technology. It was either either originated or heavily developed there. Have we lost something fundamental?
There's something. I sense something else happening, which is good. I see a cooperation amongst universities around the world by virtue of the fact that the students and the faculty are moving around, and the very Chinese students. I had students who were Chinese, and they're either went to Taiwan, they're back in China now, but what they're doing is promoting basic research. They're actually getting some of the companies there to invest, like Bell Labs did, in setting up 1,000, 2,000 MS and PhD people developing new stuff. And I don't think they're all going to be so provincial about holding it, because they have friends who their doctoral thesis guy might be in the United States, in Canada, or might be somewhere in Europe. I see more interaction. Even the heads of universities now are setting up campuses around the world that trying to integrate the research and the efforts. So maybe that's the new idea of instead of it's a Bell Labs within a company, or Watson Labs or the RCA or et cetera. Maybe it's through the university system.
I mean, Michal, you have roots in Brazil, in Israel, and in the United States. It sounds like this.
Yes,
this rings true to you.
I think definitely. I think naturally. I have students from all over the world, including Israel and Brazil, and I'm sure that's true for Brian, I think. And it's definitely, I totally agree that there is a natural diversity and of thinking. One thing that is emerging in the last few years is funding agencies. NSF, DARPA, and all the major funding entities, the NIH, they are supporting interdisciplinary research, which just started a few years ago, I would say 5 years ago, that big push for interdisciplinary research. So that's where a lot of the ideas could come.
Now, Brian, this is making me think of something that you mentioned when we were talking earlier, that there is in theoretical physics, there's an economic landscape as well. That in a sense, graduate students, vote with their feet of where they think the interesting research is going. Departments decide where they want to build faculty. Does that create its own sort of competitive ecosystem? Has that been beneficial for string theory? And how has that sort of colored the evolution of theoretical physics?
Well, it's created an interesting situation where one of the criticisms that string theory has had thrown at it from time to time is that it attracts the best students in theoretical physics, which I find an interesting criticism, because if one wants those students, one wants them because they are creative thinkers, they have open minds, they're willing to take chances, all the things necessary for great breakthroughs. So you should trust that they can make a good decision about what they want to work on. And if they choose to work on a given field, say string theory, they're doing it because it looks exciting to them and it looks like a field that has things happening and they want to be part of it. So yes, from the standpoint of attracting good students, that has been a very nice side of the field's visibility and progress. But yeah, it has created a tension with other areas which want to have more of those students for their own. I think my own view is these things go in waves that are dictated by what's happening in the field. The Large Hadron Collider, which is our big technological instrument, only came online in 2008, right? It was in development for decades. This is one of the most complex scientific instruments ever built, and it is probing the structure of matter on length scales that we haven't been able to probe before because we haven't had this kind of energy. And as this machine has come online, more and more students are starting to think about the data analysis, the theoretical models that might be able to explain the new data that hopefully will emerge from this machine at some point. Who knows?
So,
and that's a good thing.
Yeah, let me just to explain to the audience, I assume most people are familiar with the Large Hadron Collider. It's an enormous particle accelerator on the French-Swiss border. It's a 17-mile ring that smacks subatomic particles together at very, very close to the speed of light, and then essentially it's like creating a controlled car wreck and then watching to see what comes out to figure out what cars are made of. It's the same thing but for particles.
The only difference is,
well, okay,
if you slam the cars together at ordinary energies,
yes,
the only thing that you'll find is literally what they were built from. The wonderful thing about this machine is that it makes use of Einstein's E equals mc squared. It slams these protons together. It creates, in some sense, pure energy in that collision, which can then reform itself in terms of particles that weren't there in the first place. So you may have heard that this Higgs particle may have been discovered. It's not that the Higgs was there and you just needed to smash the protons apart and the Higgs sort of said, hi, I'm here. The energy is created at such an intensity, such a density that the Higgs can be created from it. So it's this wonderful transmutation of the energy of motion into the energy that can create new particles. So we're looking for new species of particles that various theoretical frameworks suggest should be there. And we haven't found any of them yet, but it's early in the game. But that's the nature of research. So we may not find anything, and that may rule out certain ideas. It may make it hard to test other ideas, for instance, the ones that many of us are working on, but that is high risk. So it could be that at the end of the day, I retire not knowing whether a single thing that I did has any relevance to reality. But that's the high reward side of it is maybe we'll answer some of the deepest questions that we've ever asked.
So does that mean maybe then that you're suggesting that the risk and reward process is sort of self-correcting, while there's this criticism thrown at you that hey, you've become the mainstream, now you're the man, sort of oppressing the new ideas, if what happens is we do all this work on the experimental side and nothing comes along that supports it, that the process will be self-correcting, that people will drift to new areas of intellectual.
The worry is that it's not self-correcting enough in the current era. That's the concern. The concern is, sure, in the old days you'd say, do the experiment, and if you don't find what you predict, you throw away the ideas and you move on. The problem here is, if you don't find what, say, string theory predicts could be there, that's not enough to throw the theory away. It could easily be the case that the theory's new features would only become manifest at even higher energy scales, at even smaller length scales. So the worry is you may never know, or you may not know for a very, very long time, generations from now. Now, if we find nothing and none of these ideas bear fruit, I do think that people will start to focus their attention on other things, simply because there won't be enough activity, there won't be enough positive reinforcement from working in this area. So I think that will naturally happen on its own, that string theory might be shifted to the side, become more of a mathematical undertaking that some people will still work on, maybe in the corner, and then at some point when we can test these ideas, it'll come back. But the main concern that people have, and I share that concern, which is the weird thing to sometimes have a tense conversation with people where you actually agree with the bottom line idea. It is difficult to do science in an era when some of the ideas that you're putting forward can be beyond the reach of technology. So I put it to all you guys at the other side of the table, find a way to test these ideas that goes beyond what we can do today. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.